Okay, so thank you for joining us. We're here to talk to you today about how creating exceptional shopper experiences can really help drive long and short-term growth for your brands. We're going to do this in two ways. First of all, we're going to showcase the latest evidence and approach that Kantar has based on all of our research that determines how much of an impact experience actually has. And then we're going to really kind of bring that to life with some actual examples of where we've seen that happen. I'm just going to pass to Dave.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess first point to make is everyone knows customer experience, shopper experience is really scrutinized. It's highly measured, but it's actually often quite misunderstood in terms of its role in contributing to the growth of a brand. So we'll start off with an example and talking about a purple chair. And some of you might recognize this. It's not just any purple chair. If you visited a certain coffee shop sometime in the early 2000s, you'll probably remember it. Um, crushed velvet in the corner. Um, a lot of things happened in these purple chairs. People got together, people broke up, people read books, they wrote dissertations, sweaters were knitted. It was known as the best seat in the house. And I remember when Starbucks came to the small high street I grew up near. It felt like a bit of New York had come to suburbia. There were really strong smells. There were a lot of noise. There was a lot of bustle, and it was something that the high street hadn't really experienced before. And the purple chairs were a really big part of what made that space special. They were really recognizable as the green aprons. And as Starbucks scaled, they had to make sure the furniture was more durable, customers needed to be served more efficiently, and products developed to meet a wider set of needs. Now they have over 38,000 stores. Their growth has really been tremendous, but the stores have also changed significantly. So what they had to do, you can see from this recent picture, the floors are tiled. There's a don't slip sign. There's lots of products featuring. So they've had to make some decisions about how do they scale and keep costs under control. But one of the things that I guess, a really critical question that this raises is if something that's really distinctive about your brand is how the brand feels, what happens when that starts to erode, right? So everyone will know Starbucks is a really successful brand. By the measure of demand power, which is see on this green line, this is how Kantar measures brand strength. The category average is 100. So if you're an average brand in that space, you will have a score of 100. So you can see Starbucks is incredibly strong. At the moment, the only brand in their space that's ahead of them is Costa. But I guess the question becomes, does Starbucks feel as different as it once did? And I think for a lot of us in this room, if you went to Starbucks in Birmingham this morning, it doesn't feel as different as it used to. And whilst they're still performing really strongly, you can see that their demand power since 2020 has declined relatively sharply, so by 60 points. And in line with this, you can also see this purple line, which is standing for something unique. So there's a direct correlation between their demand power, how strong their brand is, and how different they feel to customers. And actually, last year, they scrapped their 2025 guidance. Sales were down, earnings were down. And their new CEO, Brian Niccol, came out with this announcement around the guidance, talking about the experience feels a lot more transactional than it used to. The product is trying to serve is inconsistent. Wait times are too long. The handover experience is a lot more hectic than it used to be. And the key thing he said was they had drifted from their core. So he's recognizing they're not as different as they once felt. And the reason this is important is because great marketing and customer experience together is really what drives growth. And when we look at lots of different brands that are experiencing a bit of a drift and a decline, often what we see is the role of the experiences that they're responsible for as part of their long-term brand building has become overlooked, or maybe it's misunderstood in terms of how important it is. So if you think about marketing and paid media versus customer experience, over the last decade, the last 20 years, there's been a huge amount of understanding built in what's the impact of paid media. But there is a real separation when you then start to think about customer experience. So we do have an incredible ability to understand the real-time moments, how are customers feeling about the experience, and we're often able to put that in the hands of frontline staff, which is amazing innovation. But we rarely think about customer experience and how is it contributing to the brand building effort. But it should be, and it often has an equal role. And Starbucks is a great example of we need to better understand how the customer experience is contributing to how people feel about the brand. And the brands who do understand this and they understand the symbiotic relationship of marketing and paid media and their customer experiences, those are the brands that are best positioned for long-term growth as well as short-term commercial wins. And to prove that, on this chart, you will see these two lines here. These two at the bottom are the S&P 500 and the MSCI World Index between 2006 and 2004. Now, if you look at the top two lines, these are the brands within Kantar's own studies that we consider extremely strong brands. So the thing to take away from this slide is brands who have strong brands, they grow much quicker than stock market. Also, if you look at the economic recession in 2008 here and COVID, those brands also rebound from those types of crises much, much quicker. So there is a real commercial imperative to have a strong brand. If you want a strong brand, you need your marketing and your customer experience to work together. And at Kantar, a lot of our clients have recognized this, are beginning to recognize this, and are coming to us with some really interesting questions. So, in the middle, a large telco business. Actually, how do we measure brand and how do we measure experience perceptions consistently? So, wanting to understand if we're trying to do this thing in marketing and this thing in customer experience, how are those things and are those two things working together to build our brand strength? Or on the far right, you can see a sportswear brand who historically had put a lot of focus on their e-commerce just around driving conversion. And we're starting to notice that actually their brand positioning was becoming weaker. So we work with them to try and balance that digital experience to continue supporting conversion, but also be used as a really critical touch point to continue building their brand.
Thanks, Dave. And as we know, the retail landscape has been and will continue to be in a kind of perma-crisis. There's lots of different headwinds and tailwinds that are really driving that. And at Kantar, we have identified the kind of the top 5 themes in retail for this year and also beyond that are going to continue to impact and drive decisions both from a retailer, brand, and consumer perspective. So the first one is all around, navigating the cross currents that we see. We know that, there is some tentative expectations of economic recovery, but also, we know there's this huge level of uncertainty. I think, even if we just think about the tariffs announced over the weekend, all of these things will have, in the context of us and our world, have big impacts. And, this very much kind of global versus local element that we're seeing will impact supply chain and sourcing. We're seeing that there's going to be a move much more towards decisive retail. So we're seeing a lot of our clients being really focused on actually, is our portfolio the right portfolio that we need to succeed in this environment? Do we need to go out and acquire more, or really do we need to be streamlining and really focusing on the portfolio that we do have? And then really, we've seen this really big shift from retailers in terms of creating these cohesive ecosystems. So it's no longer about walking into a store to buy a product. It's about what's the surround sound of engagement that we can have with our customers outside of just what they put in their basket, but banking, legal, and pure experience as well. We then also think about this value reset. And obviously, in a cost of living crisis, there is a big focus on price. But we're also seeing through our research that the way that people are defining value is changing, and the experience that they have has a big impact on what they are prepared to pay for those who can make those choices. And then finally, AI, what is that going to bring? So we all know about the rise of AI and possibly, have firsthand of using it in our daily lives. But from a retail perspective, with, the path to purchase becoming increasingly complex and circular, those retailers that we see are really investing in this. We're starting to have big impacts on how they operate and how they want and their expectations of their suppliers. So to understand how we address that, because obviously all of that is pretty pretty big, we first need to understand, building to Dave's points earlier, well, what is it that makes a strong brand? And Kantar's research over the past 50 years has allowed us to identify three critical components of brand strength. One is that it needs to be meaningful. It needs to really kind of meet the emotional and functional needs of the consumers and shoppers that they have. It needs to be different. So, and not just kind of perceived, but be spoken about, and really kind of driving, particularly in this social commerce world, driving that kind of difference and of engagement, not just in terms of what they sell. And then the other is kind of salient. So making sure that you are being um, you're coming to mind more easily when making specific purchase decisions. And what have we learned from that is that being more different, being more meaningful from the competition means that you're more likely to be chosen. And these customers are willing to pay a premium for what you offer. So what you see here is the top third of brands are really demonstrating meaningful difference and salience. And they're not just relevant for marketing, these factors. They're things that we should expect to see delivered across the path to purchase, meeting needs, building trust, and really creating memories that bring your brand to mind. And these could actually, what we're working with clients on is, that these being metrics of actual consumer experience. So, what builds a brand? A brand is the total of everything that comes to mind when you think of that brand. So, we often think of brand building as advertising and paid media, but what we see is that typically only 25% of all touch points come through paid media and TV ads. So it's important, but it's actually only making up a quarter of the perceptions people have towards brands. And I know kind of from our clients and their budgets, that's not replicated as to where the focus of the business goes. So that leaves 75% that really is driving other touch points. And a lot of that is rooted in the customer experience itself. So if we look at CPG, what we can see here is experience in store and at home contributes around 55% of total brand disposition. So this is, looking at all of these touch points. By really focusing on these and understanding these, it absolutely allows us to drive our brand predisposition. So, I guess a question we often ask our clients is when they're taking a macro view of where their investment goes, is it proportionate to actually what drives your brand predisposition? And we have, given that strong brands deliver stronger commercial performance and the outsized kind of disproportionate role of experience in building this, it shouldn't come as a surprise that actually from our data, we see that brands that who improve their customer experience are 2.5 times more likely to significantly increase their market share. And that's rooted in Kantar data that we have. So I'm going to pass back to Dave there just to build on that.
Thank you. So yeah, I guess as we look into the components of a strong brand, meaningfully different and salient, obviously they carry different weights. We know from an experience perspective that meaningful, so delivering on people's emotional and functional needs is really important, but so is difference. I guess this chart shows that for brands that have excess meaningfulness, so they're seen as more meaningful than their competition, more different and more salient, they have a much more incremental chance of growing in the next year. So that's kind of looking at short-term benefit. But when we really delve deeper, the strongest brands are the ones that over-index on difference. So the performing in the top third here leads to a far greater likelihood of growth. And we've been working with Oxford's Say Business School over the past 2 years and demonstrated that difference was actually the #1 predictor of share price performance. So it's the single biggest factor explaining just over a third of the overall variance in performance. So delivering your difference, what makes you unique as a brand, what makes customers feel like you're unique as a brand, is really what makes the difference, both your short-term and your long-term growth. And actually, from a CX perspective, these metrics are becoming much more part of the programs that we run for our clients. To understand, okay, actually, where are you building difference in your brand? And a lot of our clients are quite surprised by where they are delivering difference, but also where are the opportunities where actually there's no difference being created. And a lot of those times they're quite important touch points. And if I talk just a little bit more about difference, I think so I've spoken about difference as a great indicator for growth. Difference also has a huge impact on your pricing power. So the ability to charge the price you want, the ability to raise prices without a downturn in demand. So difference is really important for market share growth, but also for pricing growth. And as profit becomes more and more pressed, it just shows you the importance of building your difference, especially in the current economic winds. And if we break down, I guess, what builds an experience into a little bit more detail. So if we speak about meaningful, so meeting those functional and emotional needs, you can look at kind of 3 tiers of meaningfulness, right? So is it effective? I have a need, it's delivered against that. Or this brand set an expectation in my mind and it feels true to that. Was it easy? So was it easy to go through the process? To a point, was it enjoyable? And then what you're really trying to do is build some affinity. So when customers are going through that experience, is there some type of connection being built? Is there trust in an emotional sense? And then if we look at difference, you want to deliver experiences that are unique. So an experience that that customer can only get with your brand, that no other brand can offer. And in the really top tier experiences, at the right time, there is this little magical moment. And those magical moments are really important because what they do is they create memories, and memories are the most powerful part of building your brand through experience. I think now we're just going to bring this to life with a couple of case studies.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about Aldi because it's a great illustration of a brand that has successfully gone from kind of a marginal player to a mainstream grocer retailer. It's now the fourth largest supermarket in the UK. But if we go back, it's been a long story for them to get there. And if we go back to kind of 2010, 2011, where they only had 4% market share, we can see that at that point they were way below the average in across all 3 metrics. And then what we started to see is that they've started to expand their thinking. So obviously they came in with price as their differentiator to get a foothold in the market, but that doesn't distinguish them from other players that were coming in. So they started to expand their thinking with a focus on quality and value. And here we start to see their market share grow to 8%. And what you can see is that here that they are now overperforming against the average around their different meaningful and salient difference. Particularly, we think about that they really started to focus on better quality and the excitement of the middle aisle that really gave people some anticipation. It was something different. The churn of the product categories from kind of sportswear to cookware, really started to give them a point of difference beyond just their price. And then we start to see that, again, they've continued to demonstrate this through the cost of living crisis. So they've retained that saliency through their pricing, but they've also, started to be the go-to supermarket because you can get quality products there. They have a price and range architecture that you would find in other grocers, but also they're bringing more brands that they know the customers want to the store too. So we really, and they're starting to see when we look at Kantar wheel panel data, people starting to shift to Aldi from retailers that never before we would have expected to see a shift from. So, as we can see clearly here, as they've grown that market share, they've really driven their meaningful, different and saliency with their customers.
Yeah, and the second example to share is Red Bull. So this is a brand everyone will know, and all of us can probably recall gives you wings, the tagline. Um, but over time, Red Bull have been really successful in establishing themselves as much more than just a drinks brand. So they're really closely connected to sports and extreme stunts culture. Um, and in 2024, um, Red Bull in the US had a brand valuation of over $22 billion. So they're an enormous brand. But actually, that represents a 19% growth on the previous year. So they're a well-established brand who are continuing to grow at double digits. So it's quite a remarkable achievement, especially when you consider how competitive that category is. And it's a really wonderful example of how brands can generate more demand and win in that highly competitive landscape without having to drop its premium price point. And what they did is they have had an obsessive focus on building how distinctive they are as a brand, and how disruptive they are seen. And those are kind of two markers of building your difference. So they've placed a huge amount of focus on that in their advertising, in the content they're putting out, but also coming up with some really interesting shopper activations. So one of the things that they did in the UK quite recently on petrol forecourts was, you would go to fill your petrol up, and you could actually win the chance on the forecourt to change a real F1 car's tires, right? So they were kind of tapping into that sponsorship, tapping into that association that they have with Formula One, and doing something quite provocative and quite disruptive, right? And what that's doing in people's mind, as well as getting them, I guess, to trial some products, is really establishing them as a brand that's really distinctive. And that's, one example of the types of experiences that they've offered to really drive their growth. And you can see here on the chart on the far right, um, on the vertical axis is how different they are as a brand. So you can see that real focus on building their difference through distinctive and disruptive behavior has meant that over time, so from 2017 to 23, where they were already strong in difference, they've continued to build that. And they've also done that in a way that's relevant to people. So it's not difference for difference sake, it's difference that feels true to their brand, and in a way that is meaningful to their customers. So when you think about Red Bull and Starbucks and Aldi and the brands that we've mentioned, what they are not just focused on are frictionless experiences, which is a buzzword that's been around CX for a long, long time. Frictionless and easy experiences, easy to go through, but often quite unremarkable. So you might get what you need, but it's very transactional. There's nothing memorable. There's no real reason beyond the ease to come back. And the challenge with that is everyone's competitors are constantly trying to make their experiences easier, more frictionless. So it's not a competitive advantage. When you get to the next type of experience, it is it is frictionless and it is easy, and there is an attempt to be distinctive. So there's an attempt to have some association with your brand to build some type of difference. A lot of the brands in that will be very frictionless experiences that are heavily branded, and that's kind of it. And what we're trying to help all of our clients get to is the top right of this chart. So experiences that deliver on that need of the customer, but often there's some level of delight in that very functional experience. But what they are doing incredibly well is they are giving an experience that is unique to that brand, so it feels different. And there is an emotional peak somewhere in that experience, that kind of magical moment, which makes that experience memorable. And that is what drives people to come back. That is what drives people's willingness to pay more for that brand to continue enjoying those experiences. And obviously that changes, drastically from financial services to retail. So it's all about finding out, how do we build our meaning and our difference in a way that's true for us. So when we speak to our clients and we're talking to new clients, this is often a question that we ask them. Does your experience make your brand feel different? And if it doesn't, that's something that we need to support them on, because every CX program, anyone who is working in customer experience or in marketing or in operations or in customer service should be thinking about, how are we delivering our difference in our experience? There's lots of different ways that we help clients do that. So just to call out a few things here, one of the things, if you're trying to understand how do we deliver more of our difference, is to understand, how are we positioned within our competition? So are we delivering something that they are not? Are we delivering an experience that's truer to our brand? Are we giving people the right moments along the customer journey that drive those memories, that drive them to come back? Do we understand actually how much is our customer experience delivering back to us commercially? How is it contributing to our brand worth? And then also, are we measuring the customer experience in the right way and with the right volumes? I think we're very fortunate at Kantar to work with some of the best clients in the UK, clients that regularly top the charts for customer satisfaction, for the quality of their customer experience, and through partners are winning awards together. And that's a real focus on, how do we make the experiences more meaningfully different. And the way that we do that is actually quite simple. So Ruth was talking about our meaningfully different salient framework, which is a brand framework that's been developed over decades. What we've quite simply done is we've taken those really critical metrics around meaning and difference and salience, and some of the metrics that sit under those, and applied those to customer experience. So that means for a brand, we can measure paid media, we can measure experiences, shopper moments, even moments at the till, to understand, is that contributing to our meaning and difference? And if it's not, trying to understand, well, what do we need to do to change that, to make sure it is balancing that short-term conversion with building that long-term brand equity. So it's having that connected measurement ecosystem from brand. So how is the brand perceived versus the competition? So when people think of us versus our competition, what do they see as unique? Maybe where are we behind? Where are we ahead? All the way down to, does a specific touch point differentiate us as a brand, and how can we improve it? Oh, sorry.
Thanks. And another part of the work that we do here at Kantar is really, getting to understand around mapping that omni-channel shopper path to purchase, and what is the kind of the shopper journey, and leveraging this understanding to really optimize the shopping experience. So what we do is we build an end-to-end path to purchase. So it starts with what is the main reason for for this person to be going to purchase, going to shop. And this is typically either driven by a mission. There's a specific mission that they have that they need to buy a product for, or there's a specific need. Why are they buying into the category itself? And from that, we're then able to start to understand, okay, so who is that person? What is the profile of that person? At what points can we influence them? along that path to purchase? Are we kind of being considered at any point in that path to purchase? And or really understand, before they even get to the store, what are the most impactful touch points for them? And by understanding that, we can start to then dig deeper into, okay, so what are the reasons for those choices? Why do they buy what they buy? What did they actually buy? What are the most impactful store touch points? It's not enough just to know, what the touch points are, but once we get into the store, why are they impactful? What are the decisions it's helping to inform? And, how do we think about driving and using all of this knowledge to think about driving the overall customer experience, but having that detailed knowledge to know actually our brand we've got um, interaction at the pre-store touch point. We're really losing it in store. We need to really focus about how we're showing up in store, or actually we're not really focusing on, we're not really appearing in people's consideration sets. Why is that? What do we need to do? And how do we show up better so that they're thinking of us before they've even got to the digital or physical shelf? And at Kantar, we combine research and data insights that connect to CX, brand, and shoppers, and we have, as we've shown you, multiple kind of tools and diagnostics that we can use to do that. And typically, these are where do we kind of build impact? So, understanding your brand value impact, and is there a gap between the brand perception and the experience? What's causing that? Is there a gap between the brand perception and actually your market share value? What's driving that? So really understanding if there's any gaps or opportunities. Looking at your competitor profiles. So where do your competitors perform well against where you're performing, and what strengths are most attractive to your customers, and who also might be focusing on some new expectations of shoppers ahead of the game. So where are you perhaps a bit vulnerable in that as well? And just really, the touch points along that journey, be they virtual, physical, really understanding how the touch points build our brand and what are they doing to drive immediate commercial benefit. And, ultimately, where do we best spend our money to better deliver our difference? And then we would kind of close, we'd love to kind of leave you with some questions to consider. So firstly, when you think about your brand, what is the experience that is unique to it? And how do your propositions help you stand out versus your competitors? Thinking about all the touch points that we've showed and their impact on predisposition, that is going to vary on brand and category. So which touch points are most important for you in building brand memories? And do you actually know? Are you in a position to know that right now? And then, thirdly, do you have the right measurements? Because that's critical. If you're not measuring against meaningful metrics, then, you're not, it's very difficult to activate with purpose. So really thinking about what is the customer experience contribution to your brand, and can you effectively measure your difference right now? So, these are the things that, as I say, David and myself and our colleagues at Kantar are working with clients, on a daily basis, and it's really at the forefront of what we're being asked as a business, and we wanted to share that with you as well. Thank you very much.
So I think if
What time are we on?
I think we have got time for some questions, but also if you want to use that QR code, you can look at our 2024 brand study. So that's got a lot more of the data than we shared today. Some great case studies across lots of different categories. So it's a really useful resource, and it's completely free.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. Just a quick question on, it's interesting to see the shift from large brands moving from like paid media into experience. What does that mean for independents? Because that's normally their superpower. How do they compete now if everyone's going to go after experience?
I can take that one.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess one of the advantages of, independent brands is it should be a lot more simple to understand, well, what is really making us different and really focusing on that. And it's probably more important for small brands because you're not as salient as a Coca-Cola. You're not going to come to mind that quickly. So, even more so, it gives you a greater need to make sure that your difference is crystal clear and in as many of your exposures and your experiences that you're taking full advantage of that. What's really important as well is it's not to necessarily say that your experiences are more important, but what you have to really figure out is, are we delivering what we're saying as a brand in our paid media? Because that frames how people expect to experience you, and then how they experience you then frames how they think about you as a brand. So they're really, I think I use the word symbiotic because it's true of how people think about brands. They don't decipher between that's paid media and I'm now experiencing the brand. They think about it as one piece.
I would build on that as well, is that those bigger brands, they can't execute that level of meaningful difference at scale. I spent before joining Kantar, I was at Mothercare, and the independent market there is so strong, and there was so much stuff that just because of the scale of our organization, we couldn't deliver to the level that the independent. So I always think about what they can't do as well, for having that kind of view around what you can be unique by being different to them because they can't get there too.
Yeah. And Starbucks is actually a good example of that because whilst they had to make a lot of choices on cost, the market changed as well. So independent coffee shops, kind of, I'm a coffee snob, that became much more of a big thing. And that definitely impacted how people felt about Starbucks. And that competition didn't exist to the same degree I guess, when they first came to the UK.
Mhm. So no.
Hello there, Robert Macmillan. Thanks very much for an interesting presentation. This may be a very simplistic question coming from an older person, but you mentioned the necessity to have ease of transaction in dealing with your brand. My wife and I find, and it's her business, it's getting increasingly difficult for that ease in the money collection systems, in how people want to take our money off us in our everyday lives, let alone the business. What opinion have you got on the way we're going? And if I could give an electric and petrol car analysis for a small business, it's possibly getting to the stage where they won't be able to take their business around anyway, because they won't be able to afford the overnight stops and charge it. I'm not against electric cars. I'm just saying the actual implication of them is not being discussed in terms of small enterprises. Thank you.
I think it's about finding the appropriate level of friction. So sometimes there is a real obsession, around frictionless. But actually, there are times where a bit of friction is a good thing. So one example is Betty Crocker, cake in a box. What they found were when they launched, the sales were pretty strong, but not in line with what they had predicted. Actually, one of the things that they did was they added the fact that you needed to include an egg in the recipe, which they didn't historically do. So they added a moment of friction, which feels a bit counterintuitive, but actually the impact it had on the customers was it felt more involved. So they were baking. They weren't, here's a box and put it in the oven. So that was the right level of friction to bring in. So I guess to answer your question, it can't always be frictionless. You got to find the right balance. And sometimes things that are too easy are easily forgotten.
Mm. I think as well, I think ease can mean different things to different people, different generations, different categories. I always think, if you think about Amazon, their definition of convenience is you get it as soon as possible. Depending on the purchase you're making, that might not be what you want. So I think really thinking about that as a context for where you might focus is quite important too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.